Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. As our listeners know, we love a certain set of topics here on the Tech Ed Podcast. We love talking about how we inspire the next generation of talent into the world of manufacturing and advanced manufacturing. We talk about how we want to get their parents understanding how important it is for these jobs, these amazing careers to be on their radar. We talk about the amazing technology in the world of advanced manufacturing, and we talk about how well these jobs pay. And today we have a guest that is going to educate us on all of that. He is an author. He's an advanced manufacturing expert. His name is Terry Iverson, and Terry is the author of Finding America's Greatest Champion and Inspiring Champions in Advanced Manufacturing. With titles like that, you know this is going to be a great episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Terry Iverson, thank you so much for coming into the studio.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I'm honored to be here.
And we're honored to have you. You have an amazing background, by the way, in manufacturing, and would love to just hear the story. I always love people's backstories. And what got you interested and connected to this field of advanced manufacturing, Terry?
Well, my family's been in manufacturing for almost 100 years now, and my grandfather started in the business, back in the 1920s, and our company started in 1931. But my dad, we have a machine tool distributorship, and my dad was headed up that. And actually, my uncle in Milwaukee hired me into his machine shop. And so that got started, and then that led for me to work for my father in the machine tool distribution.
So lots of experience in the machining side of manufacturing. That's a side of the manufacturing space that's near and dear to my heart as well. We're sitting here in the Midwest. I know you spent a part of your life in Florida, but for most of it, it's been Southeast Wisconsin. It's been suburban Chicago and the state of Illinois. What is it about the Midwest that makes it such a magnet for manufacturing?
We have so many families and people that have immigrated from Europe in different all points thereabout. For example, Wisconsin has a very rich German heritage.
For sure.
And there's a very rich Italian, Polish heritage down in Chicago. So, a lot of the people that came over to this country brought their skills and craft with them. And I think as a country, we're very fortunate for that. And so you don't have to go very far in our industry to see that firsthand.
Really, really important part of our economy here, as is advanced manufacturing in general. And I know you have, Terry, taken a significant part of your career and dedicated it to inspiring that next generation of manufacturing talent. What makes you so passionate about showing this next generation of individuals the great opportunities for them in advanced manufacturing?
Well, I grew up, my parents split up when I was young, and so my mom raised me down in Florida, and I had a lot of people that mentored me. And so consequently, I made it my goal in life, regardless of my career, to mentor young people because I was very fortunate. So I did that coaching travel soccer. I would mentor young people. And then as I got into the manufacturing space, and after I pretty much had retired from coaching travel soccer, I decided I needed to mentor young people in manufacturing. And so I officially formed a 501c3 called Champion Now. That was back in 2012. But I started from day one, which has now been almost 43 years, mentoring young people both within my company and outside of the company. But our family's been so very fortunate, my uncles, my dad, my grandfather, and many others, that I really felt compelled and obligated to give back.
Absolutely. So giving back in particular to the manufacturing sector. And as you think about that manufacturing sector, what is it that makes it so important to you? It's so near and dear to your heart when you mentor these young people, when you explain to them about the amazing careers in advanced manufacturing. How do you convey that message? What do you tell them about advanced manufacturing that fuels this passion in you that these should be careers that young people should consider?
Well, so many young people and just the general public know so little about manufacturing. So that's a problem from day one. And then there's such a travesty in this country with, people going into debt for education. And education's important, so no one will argue that, myself included. However, the need for what education is necessary for each individual varies, and how each person learns varies. So, I was very good in math and science, and I almost, tried to stay away from manufacturing because of the family tie. And then I woke up one day and I realized, you're good in math and science. What are you doing? And so, the fact that student debt is a major problem in our country, and the fact that us in manufacturing have done, I think, a poor job in letting the secret out on how awesome manufacturing is. Computers came into the game, so to speak, in about the 1980s in this country.
Right.
And, we have computerized equipment and automated equipment, and we have to be globally competitive. Well, what better to attract the next generation than computerization and automation?
Absolutely. It's almost like playing video games on the shop floor in so many ways. And as we often comment on the podcast, the closer that a job gets to the automation, the more interesting it becomes, the better that it pays, and the safer that it is, and so on. And so you're exactly right. You look back on that 100 years of family history in manufacturing, that world has changed quite a bit. In fact, significantly. And in fact, if those Germans or those Italians or the folks from Poland that immigrated here to the United States 100 years ago were to walk in today's modern manufacturing environment, they would absolutely not even recognize in so many ways what's going on, which I think makes manufacturing such an exciting place to work and such a great space for young people to consider in terms of the rest of their careers as they look at all the options as they're coming out of secondary education, leaving high school and deciding, I want to go direct to the workforce. I want to go to a technical or community college. I want to serve my country and our nation's military, or I want to go to a 4-year university. And as you alluded to, any of those and all of those are great decisions. Certainly nothing wrong with going to a 4-year university, but it feels to me a little bit like the perceptions of the value of a 4-year education for at least some students is starting to change a little bit. Are you seeing the same thing? And you covered that just a little bit. Tell me what you're seeing on that landscape.
Yeah, when you hear, the big boys like General Motors for the first time in their history saying that they're not going to require a 4-year degree for some skilled positions, that kind of speaks volumes, right? So, yeah, I think there's a change. I think there's been a need for a change. I think in education, making education relevant and hands-on. I was ADHD before they could spell ADHD, right? And so I had a very short attention span. So how I learned was different than just sitting in a classroom.
Right.
So a lot of education today, they're changing that. And, Project Lead the Way is doing some very cool stuff. And there's other facets that people are learning things that are relevant. And then just getting the word out that manufacturing is still alive and well in this country. And the pay is going up because it is a more complicated profession than what it used to be.
No question about that. I look back, you and I share a lot of personality traits, I think. I look back at the report cards or my parents' student-teacher conferences when I was a kid, and the comments were things like, Matthew's hyperactive, Matthew's rambunctious, Matthew can't sit still, Matthew wants to be the center of attention. And that's, those were what my report card said. And then you look back on that, and it dawned on me at some point in my professional career, and all the things I got in trouble for when I was in grade school were the things that made me the most successful when I got to the world of manufacturing. Because in the world of manufacturing, if you can't sit still, that is not a curse, that's a blessing. The fact that our companies wouldn't sit still, that we were always trying to find a way to come up with the next best idea, or to make sure that we were always competing at a real high level, or thinking about what other companies in our space were doing and trying to beat them to the punch. Really, really important. The fact that I was hyperactive and rambunctious. Man, on a day in manufacturing where for whatever reason you got to be totally on for 17, 18 hours because that huge order needs to go out the door, or you've got a gigantic quote that's going out the next morning and you're up against a deadline, that hyperactivity and rambunctiousness was an absolute blessing. So all these things that we, in so many cases, criticize young people for as they're growing up, especially boys in that case, they end up being the kind of things that are really, really valuable when they get into the workforce. So you and I couldn't agree more that, having these hands-on opportunities, having these interactive opportunities, and all the advancements we're seeing in how we look at education, really, really important. And I think it's important for our students to recognize that as you're coming out of high school, especially if you're the kind of person that's a hands-on kinesthetic learner that has a tremendous amount of energy, maybe that 4-year university might not be the best place for you. I know you've done quite a bit of research on kind of understanding the financial ramifications of different education pathways. And certainly, again, I've got a 4-year degree. I'm proud of my degree. Mike Lovell, if you're listening, president of Marquette University, former guest on the Tech Ed podcast, nothing at all wrong with a 4-year degree or a graduate education at all. However, it doesn't need to be the only option. And I think it's important for young people as they're moving on from whatever comes after high school to recognize the financial ramifications of their decisions. Talk a little bit about some of your research and what you've gleaned, Terry, about the cost of a 4-year education and maybe the ROI on that education.
Well, let's talk about engineering for a second.
Sure.
And that was my major. And I had 6 years of school and I dropped out because I had enough knowledge for what I needed.
Sure.
Right. But we need engineers, and engineers need to be degreed, right?
For sure.
Well, but there's so many other professions and so many other facets that don't necessarily need a $250,000 degree. And we all know, and I'm sure you know, that the cost of formal education post high school has increased more than anything else, right?
Absolutely.
And so what's really terribly sad is, I had a mom come up to me after I spoke one night to a group, and she was in tears. And I said, I hope it wasn't something I said, but it was. And it was that she was overjoyed, and there was tears of joy that she thought she had failed her child because she couldn't send him or her to school, to college. Right. And so it isn't that you don't need education. It's that you need education that's good for what you want to do. You want to have an education that you can use in your profession. And unfortunately, so many people get a degree, but they don't use that degree in their profession. So it's all about the cost, the risk and the cost benefit of the education that you get. God forbid, you're going to go into debt because, we know what that means, and that's very unfortunate. And if you're going to use that education and then focus early on, I think in this country, in Europe, I think they do a better job of focusing on what young people enjoy, what they're passionate about, and what they're really, really good at. And then they focus on an education that matches the way they learn and what they are really good and will enjoy for the rest of their life.
And if you find what you're passionate about and what you're good at and where you can excel, the truth of the matter is you never really have to work in a day in your life, right? Because you love doing the work that you're doing. I can think of 2 people in particular, 2 of the vice president of operations in 2 of the last companies that I ran. And neither one of them had a college degree. They both had some post-secondary education, but neither one of them had graduated from college. I wouldn't trade either one of those 2 people for anything. They were phenomenal, incredibly brilliant, understood manufacturing backwards and forwards. They're both now chief executives of other companies. They were just shining examples. And this is, 20 years ago at a time when, I think there was even less of a recognition that we have these other options and that we don't necessarily have to standardize on one of them. So it's incredible where you can go if you've got the right attitude, if you're focused on the right things, if you learn the things you need to know to be successful in your position. And there's a lot of different ways, to your point, Terry, of learning those things. In fact, I love your line of, hey, I got to this point where I had everything I needed to be successful in the workforce, and I went in the direction I went. Really like that way of thinking. At the same time, as much as there's financial ramifications of certain education pathways, and I like to say, and this isn't original, I picked it up somewhere, that doctor that's operating on me, that operated on me right before I wake up in the recovery room, I think I want that person to have some version of a medical degree, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But, so there's nothing wrong with a 4-year degree again, but that $250,000 that he or she may have invested in gaining that education, not always the best option. There are financial ramifications as well of making different choices. For instance, technical colleges, community colleges, maybe into the skilled trades, into manufacturing, into welding, into machining, and so on. Talk about the benefits of some of those pathways a little bit.
Well, first of all, we're sitting in the state of Wisconsin, which has one of the best technical college, community college programs in the country.
No question.
And I firmly believe that the European influence on the residents of Wisconsin and the families has a lot to do with that.
For sure.
So that being said, a lot of people, a lot of us parents, we get wrapped up in, and I'm going to just say bragging about our children, which is great,
right?
But we look forward so much to bragging about our children, what school they're going to. Sometimes, and maybe we've even saved the money for them, right? And we've worked very hard, but we lose sight of, is that right for him or her?
For sure.
And so I think someone said a long time ago in a parenting group that, or friends that I was talking to, that, we're going to have our child go to a community college or a junior college first,
Mm-hmm.
and then figure out what it, and that is well beyond their years in terms of advice.
Right.
And,
For sure.
and so they may decide, okay, well, let's go to a 4-year university for the last 2 years, because now we know what we want, or we know what we're fascinated in. But I think over the last 40 years that I've been in the industry, things have changed. When I started Champion Now, I wanted to change the perception of manufacturing in terms of what people think of it. And I also want to eventually, at some point, reach to the families and change the culture. And so there is a trend going that direction. And I think, I'm welcoming that change.
Yeah, we welcome it here as well. It's interesting. I've got 2 children that are now into their 20s and have made whatever decisions they were making post-secondary. I think back to the sophomore year of high school for both of them. And we sat down with their academic advisor, who was awesome. They had the same one. She was fantastic. But the very first question in that sophomore year discussion is, have you thought about what 4-year college you're going to after high school? And it's like, that's not the right question. And of course, being in the business that we're in and spending so much time around, you're right, technical and community colleges, the work they're doing, absolutely phenomenal, looking at all the other pathways. And our kids both grew up knowing that you just need to be aware of all of them. And depending upon where you want your career to go, that should influence what comes after high school, not understanding or expecting that there's this certain path and then you're going to decide on what happens afterwards. And I think that was really, really helpful for both of them and helpful for any young people. And you're right, those parents that said, look, we're going to send our students or our children to a junior college, to a community college first, let them figure things out. And we're going to figure it out, by the way, at $5,000 or $7,000 a year, as opposed to $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a year. That's a really, really good way, I think to think about it. And credit to you and the work you're doing and bringing the understanding, the understanding level and the perception of people up to the point where, look, these are really great opportunities. And specifically, in general, you can go all kinds of ways out of a technical or community college program or a certification program, or even going direct to workforce right out of high school. In advanced manufacturing in particular, and you and I have both seen this firsthand, the kind of money that people can make with the right skills that don't require an advanced degree is just mind-boggling. It's incredible. Tell me about your perception there. If somebody's going into a machining company, a metal fabrication company, they're going into welding, they want to be a machinist. What kind of money are these people making, and what are the opportunities economically?
Well, what's interesting is a lot of people talk about 6 figures, right? And a lot of people that go to 4-year university talk about 6 figures.
Right.
Well, the reality is, and I'm not saying, when you get an entry-level position that it's a 6-figure proposition.
Right.
But there's one of the things I try to do in my books, Matt, is elevate stories of success. And one that I'll mention right now is a Hispanic young man that's in my second book. And, he and his girlfriend ended up expecting and getting married, and all of a sudden his dad, of Hispanic descent, of course, he said, okay, what's it going to be? What are you going to do, buddy?
Right.
Well, he went into a company, he found out about manufacturing, and he came from a high school that has one of the best manufacturing education programs in the Midwest.
Wow.
And he didn't even know about it.
Huh.
That being said, he stumbled into a manufacturing opportunity, and in 9 years' time, he went from literally walking in the door knowing nothing to being the plant manager in 9 years.
Yep.
And he's, in the discussions that I've had with him, he's overjoyed that he can have a family, he can buy a car, he can buy a home. But the point of the story is, yes, people are making 6 figures in manufacturing, not starting, but the opportunity for overtime is phenomenal. And the fact that there's a mentoring component, people like me that are, the last part of the baby boomer generation, right? We want to pass on our tribal knowledge. We want to pass on the soft skills and the work ethic. And not every profession is like that. Not every group of people is like that.
Right. Absolutely. And again, all those years of manufacturing experience, I saw that story repeat itself. And I know you have too, so many different times. And I can think of a young man who was, I would say in manufacturing, you can start out sweeping the floor and end up running the company, or pause anywhere on the way and have a really, really cool, rewarding, family supporting career. And that's just true. You think about other spaces in the economy, whether it's, sweeping the floor at the hospital. The odds of that person becoming the hospital administrator are not impossible, but probably pretty low. But the odds of somebody who wants to run a manufacturing company or wants to become a manufacturing supervisor or a plant manager or whatever that role is and sets their heart on that and is willing to put in the work, that is a really realistic career goal for somebody who literally can start out with no skills. And if you get a head start at a technical or community college, even you get there even more quickly. But, I've got a story about a young man who in our last company, his job was loading and unloading. People in manufacturing will know what a burn-off oven is. It's a 1200 degree oven. You're using it to burn material off of the surface of a part. It's not a glamorous job, right? I mean, there's a lot of ash. It's hot. It's, it's muggy in the middle of summer and so on. There are way more glamorous manufacturing jobs than that one. But this is the job that this young man started out in, did a great job at that, and he got promoted to being the person that was running the baskets on a dip line. Awesome at that. He ended up being a line lead. Then he ended up being the head of his shift. So he's a shift lead, then a supervisor, then a plant manager, onto a director of operations over the course of about 8 or 10 years. So 10 years after high school, this young person is running 3 manufacturing plants. They're living in the same small town they grew up in. And, we talk about 6 figures, $100,000 goes a lot further in rural Wisconsin than it does in San Francisco or in LA. Of course, $100,000 is a lot of money. You're probably one of the highest paid people in your small town. At the age of 30, you can drive any pickup truck you want. You can provide your family with the experiences that you want. You can go on vacation anywhere you want every year. And this just comes out of an opportunity in manufacturing for somebody who admittedly had, they had the right personality traits. They were willing to work hard. They were willing to take direction. They made good decisions in life. But it's amazing where you can go with a career in manufacturing, which is one of the reasons that I'm just so fascinated by the books that you've written, Terry. As we mentioned in the intro, your latest book, Inspiring Champions in Advanced Manufacturing, Discover the Path to a Debt-Free Career. Now, that's a book that dives into many of the topics that we've been talking about along the way here. So, I know you've got a really unique structure to that book, and I need our audience to understand the logic in how you wrote that book, who you wrote it for, how you're reaching them, and just kind of the really creative way that you're delivering that content to the reader.
Well, on my first book, I tried to address all audiences, students, parents, industry members, and educators. And my wife had indicated, why don't you write different books for different audiences? And I'm like, I'm lucky I'll be able to write a book, period, and not much less more than one.
Sure.
So this book, the second book, what I did was I specifically catered it to parents and students. And I try to do interviews that, kind of tell stories in addition to telling my story and my family's story. But what I did was one side it's 2 front covers. And so they're 180 degrees apart.
Got it.
And so the parent will read the parent side and flip it over and hand it to the student, or vice versa. The student will read the student edition and flip it over and hand it to the parent. What I think's missing in our country, in our culture, it's not necessarily our country, it's our culture, is that dialogue that should happen, sophomore year that you mentioned, with mom and dad and son or daughter, it doesn't really happen in today's world,
right?
And in today's culture. And so everyone just assumes that mom and dad are going to, tell them to get a loan, or mom and dad are going to pay for it. And in essence, we kind of, really unfairly give our young people, we don't give them a head start. Sure. And so they, it's 3, 4, sometimes 5 years that they're delaying success. Right. Not to mention, is it the right fit for them? And have they found a niche? So that's the format of the book, and that's how it's written. And there is questions at the end of each for each to ask the other. And there's also QR codes where they can scan and go to a digital element for people like me that have a short attention span. Yeah, right. You and me both. But I love that concept of looking at both sides of the equation, of having the parents and the students, parents and children read the same book, and maybe even flip it over and sneak in a little bit of what might be in the other, what the parent is reading or what the child is reading, to get a sense for that message. And then having these conversations around the dinner table about what is it that you really want to do? What do you love doing? What part of your life is the most fun? When you have a choice of where you want to spend your time on the weekend, where do you spend your time? And is there a career that might match that? And to your point, making that decision, or at least getting that sense when we're 17, 18 years old, or 15 or 16 years old. And then how many people do we know that have gone on a 4-year education pathway or even beyond, only to get to the workforce and look over their shoulder and say, this isn't what I wanted to do.
well, okay, there's better ways of deciding that. And I think the book that you've written does a great job of that. I know one of the things you spend a lot of time on is helping parents understand the great benefits of opportunities and careers in advanced manufacturing. And I think when we talk to most parents, at the end of the day, what they really want is for their children to say they're meeting whatever that student or whatever the young person's definition of success is, that they're on the path to that they're on the path to being, happy or content with the life choices that they make. And I think most parents, if you told them that, or if you ask them, they would say, look, above and beyond anything else, those are the two things I want for my kids. So when you're sitting down with parents and you're talking, Terry, about careers in advanced manufacturing, how does a career in advanced manufacturing for the right kids check those two boxes, both happy and successful?
I think the fact that manufacturing many times is not even on the table to discuss, it's not, sometimes it's prejudice, against it. And today's manufacturing is not your grandfather's manufacturing,
for sure.
Right?
Right.
But a lot of times it's just ignorance that everything's been shipped to China. And, yes, there's a lot of things made in China, but we've forced as a culture and as a country to become more automated, more technologically advanced. And when you do that, the jobs are more skilled and there's more skill that's necessary, more training, and as a result, higher pay. Right. So I think that, at the end of the day, if we can just understand what makes each of our children tick and what traits they have, like you and I, and make sure that they're early in the game, matching their interests, their traits, and leveraging those into a career that they'll be happy with and satisfied with. Unfortunately, manufacturing is not always on that discussion.
Right. I agree with you. It's not in that discussion. And I think we're getting better. I think to your point, we're turning the corner, your earlier point, we're turning the corner a little bit. I actually credit the pandemic in a lot of ways where, before the pandemic, a lot of folks, it was real easy to take manufacturing for granted, right? I get on Amazon, I click on my, click on whatever it is that I want. I can order by just swiping my thumb across the screen and it shows up at my house the next morning. And that's the way manufacturing works. There's some magic that goes on back there, but who knows what it is. And I like to say the silver lining of the pandemic, as hard as it was, is that, now people recognize the fundamental importance that manufacturing has to their daily lives. When we could get what we wanted, when we wanted it at a price that seemed reasonable, it was real easy to take manufacturing for granted. And now all of a sudden, when that model doesn't work, it's like, oh, wait. There is a benefit to having somebody in my hometown manufacturing product. There is a benefit to not having those sitting, whatever I was trying to order, sitting in a container in the Pacific Ocean waiting to get into a dock. There is a benefit to having my next door neighbor earning a tremendous living in the world of manufacturing. And I think in a large part, or at least to some extent, that's what's driving this manufacturing renaissance and this interest in manufacturing. And along the way, then people get interested in manufacturing. They understand how data-driven it is. They understand how automated it is. They understand how technical it is. It's not your grandfather's or even your father's manufacturing world. You and I both know that. And so it's a really, really exciting time, I think, to be considering these careers in advanced manufacturing. If I'm a parent and I'm listening to this podcast or I'm reading your book, and I'm thinking, this is interesting and I want to learn more, or I wonder if maybe my kid isn't the right kid to be considering that, or considering a career in manufacturing. How can parents tell if a career in manufacturing is right for their child? And if indeed it is, how do they encourage them to at least explore that interest or that potential opportunity?
Well, obviously, we, as parents, we know our kids best, right?
Yeah, you hope so, right?
And when you see them, gravitating towards video games or gravitating towards taking things apart and putting things back together, that speaks volumes, right? When I talk to young people and parents, I said, back in the 1970s when I was growing up and coming out of high school,
right?
I didn't have the internet. Guidance counseling was much different then than it is now.
Right.
And as a result, I had the good fortune of having a good education in high school and the ability to go on and do whatever I wanted.
Sure.
But then I had this family background that, a lot of people didn't have. So even though I didn't have YouTube like they have now,
right,
TikTok like they have now, you can learn anything. And so I get a lot of young people, Matt, that talk to me and they say, I had a young lady, which I wrote about in one of the books, at MATC, come up to me and said, Mr. Iverson, I want to be a welder. And I'm like, that's awesome.
Right.
And the fact that a young lady wanted to be a welder was even more exciting.
For sure.
And they said, but my parents, they really don't want me to do that. And I said, well, you really need to consider that they don't know what you know. They don't know how much welders make. They don't know that, you have a very creative side to you, obviously, and that, you're excited about it. But you don't get off not, by not informing and educating them. And so I think that's really why I felt that the parent-student exchange needs to be focused on, and why this particular book was focusing on that element. So, I think that, with the internet, with YouTube, and with the, wide variety of things that can be researched, there really is no reason that people have an out by saying, I don't know anything about this, because you have every ability to.
Yeah, exactly. There is no excuse anymore. And I like the way you answered that question. Go ahead.
One more element that I need to make sure that we publicize here is that in this country in October 5th, but many people are owning the whole month, is manufacturing days. Sure. So if the web is not for you, if my book's not for you, you know what? Manufacturers all over our country sign up for Manufacturing Day to invite the general public, students, parents alike, to come in and show what manufacturing is in your community.
Right. And I love the fact that, October 5th is the day, but so many manufacturers and so many organizations are saying, let's really focus on manufacturing for an entire month. Let's get students onto school buses out to manufacturing plants. Let's get our engineering team and our manufacturing team and our supervisors and those individuals out into the schools telling people about the great opportunities in manufacturing. And I think, over the course of the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen that effort grow and kind of reach a critical mass. And I think it is making a difference, and that by itself is probably not going to convince a young person to decide on a career in manufacturing. Maybe some of them, but at least it puts them on the radar, and at least they know that's a career that they could have. And 5-10 years ago, we didn't even have that opportunity. So we're making some great progress through things like Manufacturing Month. I like the fact that you said, look, there's no excuses not to know this, not to know about manufacturing. You can get on YouTube, you can get on TikTok, there's just myriad ways that you can get a hold of information about manufacturing careers. I'm also a big believer, and I like the way you answered the question about, the parents and the students, that I get the question all the time, because I, like you do, I speak quite often on these topics, and we get a lot of questions. And one of them is, how do you talk to the parents? How do you get parents excited about careers in manufacturing for their kids? And my answer is, you do it through the kids. And who among us doesn't want a kid who's excited about a career? And if you put a kid in a student-run business, you put them in a mechatronics program in high school, they're earning certifications, they're programming an industrial robot, they're showing their parents the program that they made while they were in that robotics program they made in their robotics class, or they're fabricating a part and bringing that home and explaining to the parents how exciting it was for them to make that and how interested they were in making that. If you can get the kids excited about careers in manufacturing, they will take that back home to the dinner table and at least get their parents to open up their minds. I think, in my opinion, that is the most effective way to change the minds of parents, is to do it through the kids. And I'm just a huge believer in that. And I think that the writing that you've done, the speaking you've done, and the philosophies that you have really, really do exactly that.
The data's there. It's just a matter of digesting the data and finding what's right for your child. And many times it's easy to convince the young person. It's more difficult to convince the parent.
Exactly. We've talked a lot about high school, but starting as early as middle school, that's when a lot of students are starting to at least turn off to certain career pathways. In the Manufacturing Institute, they had an amazing study that's now probably 7-8 years old, something like that, where they looked at what were the major influencers of young people's career pathways. And the number one influencer, and it's not even close, are their own interests and experiences while they're in middle school and high school. And that dwarfs all the other things. It dwarfs parents, it dwarfs teachers, it dwarfs career advisors, social media, friends. It's not even close. By a factor of 3 times, the number one influencer is what are their experiences in middle school and high school.
We just started a program that IMEC down in Illinois is piloting, where we're doing a camp where we're doing manufacturing a wooden pen on a small CNC and a wooden case, and we take this into the school. And my son's, leading the charge on this, so I have to give him credit to that.
Right.
But what we do is we laser engrave the name of the student onto the case. Okay, on a plate, and then we have them go through a cycle of these 6 different stations, And at the end, this middle school student comes away with a pen in a case with their name on it. And what the other facet, and this is the reason it made me think of it, is we have the juniors and seniors from their high school program running the machines, mentoring the middle school kids.
Right.
So now the middle school kids, very young people, come into the high school, in a year or two.
Yep.
Now they become the juniors and seniors.
For sure.
And then they're going to be mentoring the middle schools.
Awesome.
Kids, young people. So it's a sustainable model to, to your point, to the experiences where they understand what manufacturing is. They have a pen in a case with their name on it.
Yep.
Guaranteed that's going in their bedroom and they're going to keep it for decades.
Right.
And so those are our future manufacturers.
I love that way of inspiring that next generation. And then you think about those young people that are, in the class, working around the machining center, working around the engraver, and that student that's doing the work is somebody who is 4, 5, 6 years older than they are. And, you're looking up to this individual who's, that much older and saying, wow, if this is cool enough for this person, I should at least be thinking about that. That's a great way. And also for that matter, what a great opportunity for that older student to reinforce what they're doing and why it's so important and to be thinking about their own career pathway. So I've got to believe that works well both ways.
Well, there's one other element. And, we started this conversation about how strongly I felt about mentoring. My first book, the subtitle was Building Prosperity Through Manufacturing, Mentoring, and the Awesome Responsibility of Parenting. So case in point, now we're teaching young people and juniors and seniors in high school the whole concept that we kind of got away from in this country about how important mentoring is. And now they've become a mentor. So now we have young people going into the workforce that believe in mentoring and have done it and are proud of it. And hopefully they'll come back to their high school as alums and mentor, young people from their high school.
Absolutely. That point is hitting close to home. One of my mentors actually stopped into the studio this morning to say hello, somebody that I had worked with in a business 25 years ago. And it was just a huge reinforcement of the power both ways. I think not just of having a really good mentor, and I've had several, I'm sure you have as well. There's nothing like having somebody that no matter what phase of life you're in, or whether it's personally or your career, that you can at least bounce things off of and have them thinking about your well-being, maybe not having any other agenda than what's right for Terry. I mean, that's so valuable. And also the opportunity to mentor others, as you get a little deeper in your career, as both of us are, and having people that are coming in with the same questions that I had, a different generation of those questions, but all the same questions and all the same things they're wondering about, whether it's in business or otherwise, and having that opportunity to pass on, whatever challenges and bad decisions and good ones for that matter. Really, really great opportunity, I think, for both the mentor and the person being mentored. The other great opportunity I think we have in front of us is to make sure that people know where to get all the great content that you've been talking about, the books that you've written, the other organizations that you're involved with, Terry. So if our audience is interested, and I know they will after hearing our conversation today, where do they find your books and where do they find the content?
Well, there's a number of different ways. First of all, we have a website. It's championnow.org. You can also find both books on Amazon. Inspiring Champions, I believe, is also on Barnes & Noble. And then August 22nd, we're going to start a Kickstarter campaign on top of that as well.
Excellent.
So those are at least, a few. And we do have the book in multiple facets. It's audiobook, ebook, paperback,
Beautiful.
Try to get it to everyone we can.
I love it, and we'll link up the website in the show notes. So for folks that are listening, you'll be able to find it there, and also the links to Amazon and to Barnes and Noble. We're
also going to be doing a email blast to guidance counselors all around the country, and maybe one day if I live long enough, I can write a book that has a two-sided facet for educators and industry.
Yep.
That would be my next project.
Let us know when that drops, because we'll have you right back here in the Tech Ed podcast studio to share the news about that one as well. As we're closing out our time here today with Terry Iverson, just a phenomenal author, a real thought leader in this whole idea of how we inspire the next generation toward careers in manufacturing, how you get the right education, how you set your young people, whether it's your parents or your students or your children, on the right track. It's just a really great conversation. We're going to close our time today, Terry, with a question that we like to ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast. And I know you're going to have a great answer to this question. If you were to go back in time and give some advice to that 15-year-old Terry Iverson, what would you tell him?
I would say embrace your differences, first of all. Mm-hmm. And you and I just talked about our similarities, differences, right?
Got it.
The second thing I would say is focus on what you're really excited about. And I went to 5 different universities.
Yep.
So I never really found, unfortunately, in the higher education model, what was the right fit for me.
I think you found it another way.
I did. And I would also tell that young person, make sure you give back, because by giving back, you're going to learn so much more than holding everything to yourself. But I think the passion component and what excites you is undervalued in our culture right now.
Absolutely. Capitalize your career on what it is that excites you. Make sure that as you're gaining success and you're getting along in your career, that you're giving back. You have certainly given back, Terry, in so many ways, not the least of which is the books that you've written and the organizations that you've been involved with. We've just had such a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed getting to know you. Appreciate you coming into the studio and spending some time with us.
Oh, I'm honored and so pleased to have had the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.